Let me move us on to our next topic. Congolese Americans, both in Utica and Syracuse, are really closely watching the escalation of a long-term conflict in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, also called DRC. The UN is calling this, and I quote, one of the most protracted, complex, serious humanitarian crises on the earth. And I'm not sure we're hearing enough about it. I want to show you this map. So the big country with the yellow shading in the middle, that's the DRC. And then if you look over to the east on the right, there's a tiny little brown-colored country. That's Rwanda. And Rwanda is backing the M23 rebels who've captured Goma, which is on the DRC's eastern border. 1 million Congolese have been displaced by the violence. Michael, what's the background here?
Well, when you talk about the background, you think about the African continent. For a lot of people, what that triggers is little babies with distended abdomens and flies in their eyes. But that wasn't always the case for Africa. Africa was a place before colonialism was a land of bounty and relative peace. And in 1884, 1895, here comes the Berlin Conference that would separate Africa into 52 countries when it used to be the second largest continent in the world, only to Asia. So when you think about Africa, it's always been a place that had things that the world wanted, but nobody wanted to pay for. And that's the understanding of Africa. So the current moment, when I think about the relative peace coming out of World War II and Nkrumah, Pan-African socialism, overtaken by Mobutu and this new geopolitical psychology that would murder and rape and loot and rob and pillage and plunder and steal and control and exploit, which led to an acceptance of this new kleptocratic class of African governance, which also followed the Mobutu model. Right now, what we have is basically about Rwanda's violation of Congolese sovereignty, and also about the minerals that I'm sure Aaron will speak to. But it's a question that China has made more problematic by supplying drones and supplying arms. And so there's a brilliant article written many years ago called "Colonialism is Back and Not a Moment Too Soon," where it predicted who might be the new colonial interest. And right now, China is the new colonial interest. And what we see now is the collateral damage from all those sorts of things. So we have to think about China in a different way.
A lot of the exports from there are going to China.
Straight there. So we have to think about this idea globally. But they're just Africans. Let them kill themselves. Who cares?
Aaron, what about those minerals there?
Yeah, so pull out your phone. There's a lot of, we call them rare earth minerals in here. There's tungsten and tantalum, which comes from something called coltan. There's cobalt in the batteries. Those are used in the semiconductors and capacitors and electronics in these devices. And one of the hotspots of tungsten and tantalum mining is the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, right? And so one of the reasons that Rwanda is backing troops to come in and take over Goma is that if they control Goma, this major city, there's 1 million people in Goma. It's a big city, all right? And it's getting all of these minerals coming from mining towns. And if they can control that supply, they get a lot of money by selling that and supplying that to the makers of these electronics. Now, Apple was actually taken to court by the DRC. Tim Cook got a letter from the DRC saying, hey, you're not doing enough to stem this illegal trade. Apple has said, oh, we're going to get our tantalum from Brazil and Australia, not from the Congo. But yet illegal mining activities are continuing because there's so much money to be made. And China controls that trade.
Between 300,000 and 800,000 a month of minerals are being stolen out of the DRC going through Rwanda?
It's huge amounts. And Rwanda, this is the Tutsi government that's been in control in Rwanda, is backing the M23 rebels who are Tutsi. And they say, well, they need to control their interests. But this is linked to what we're using every day, and I think most Americans aren't thinking about that. When you pick up your phone, your first thought isn't, oh, is the tantalum in here, supplied from a war-torn conflict area and actually exacerbating that continued conflict, the displacement of millions of people. But everything Michael said is right. This is the legacy of extractivism. It's also the legacy of the US role in that after colonialism, right? The reason Mobutu came into power is that the US government had a big role in putting down the socialist leadership of Patrice Lumumba at the end of the colonial era in the 1960s, right? So understanding that history, it's all connected. The extraction of the wealth of Africa by colonial powers continues, and right now it's China, and it's not making anything better on the ground there.
This is a long-running conflict.
It absolutely is, and as Aaron correctly pointed out, part of the problem is sort of this U.S. attitude. You're quite correct. It's just Africa. And we have sort of this also almost schizophrenic way of first we pay attention to Africa, you know, because there's this great genocide. Remember the genocide in the 1990s? Okay, you know, this is horrible. We have to do something. And then once there's some sort of truce, then America kind of backs off and says, okay, Africa, go deal with yourself. And we focus on other things that we consider more important. Well, part of the problem has been, and this is across administrations, is as there has become this reliance on electronics, what's going on in that African country and other countries really should have become more important. There should have been more, certainly economic influence, perhaps more influence by the UN, and that isn't what has happened.
Let me pull Lisa in here.
Yeah, I mean, I think two things. One is I'm glad we're talking about this because I learned a lot. And, you know, from this discussion and from preparing for this discussion, and it made me realize how, you know, if you pay attention to sort of routine news media, you're not learning a lot about what's going on in certain corners of the world. The other thing is, you know, what can be done? What can countries do? The UK, you know, I think a lot of it is putting pressure on the Rwandan government through the denial of aid. And the UK is starting to do that, but I doubt that this administration, something tells me that this administration, with its focus on business interests over humanitarianism and foreign aid and perhaps, you know, outright racism, is not likely to participate significantly in that effort.
Right, and one of the people that will certainly have this on her plate, should she be confirmed, is our North Country Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, who is up for UN ambassador.